Okay, good morning, everybody. I just want to go over a couple of things before I start the lesson today. The main one is being the message that I posted onto Google Classroom last night, and has kind of been posted on. I think it's been posted on the college website. It's been posted on the UAL website. So I just want to kind of explain that in a little bit more detail about what that means. So if I just get it up here. So obviously at the beginning it's just thanking you for how well everyone is working during this time. So the UAL, who are your awarding body, so they are the people who give you your qualification. They've provided a little bit of information on their website regarding your major project, which is the project that you're doing now. Basically, they've kind of decided that it's too difficult for so many centres to deliver a major project. If you think you guys are okay because your project is digital, like you can do almost all of it online, you can do it on your phones, you can do all your planning and everything, and that it kind of works well for you. But if you think about other arts classes who are also UAL courses, so if you think about art and design or textiles, they all obviously need studio spaces and workshops, and they need a lot of technical support with fabric and sewing and, paints and canvases and all that kind of stuff. So, and a lot of those students do not have access to that kind of thing at home, so they can't complete their major project. So the UAL have kind of released this blanket statement applying to all of their qualifications that the major project is essentially not going to be happening anymore. But this has not been agreed by Ofqual. The Ofqual are the government agency in charge of regulating qualifications. So it's only when they agree to it that it will become a real thing. The UAL are also saying that students need to continue working on their major projects. The college has said that you need to continue working on your major projects, because it could be that your major projects will still count, but they'll count towards what you do next year, whether it's a kind of progression situation or not. So if you do want to progress either with us or externally, then your suitability to do so will be based on how well you've engaged with your studies during the COVID-19 lockdown, your academic behaviours up to and throughout the lockdown, and your on-site attendance from September up to the lockdown. It will also be looking at your overall achievement for the year. So obviously, up to this point, you only get a pass or a refer or a fail. So all of your projects that you've done, you have all passed. And it's your major project, your final major project, that you get awarded your pass, merit or distinction. This is what is unclear from the UAL at the moment, is how, without a major project in place, how we will be able to award students a pass or merit or distinction if we are just going off their past work. That is what's really unclear at the moment, and that is what's kind of blocking Ofqual from saying that they are happy for this to go ahead. So basically what this just means for you guys is that we're going to carry on as normal, because either way, your major project is important. It's something that you are all engaging really, really well with. If it doesn't count towards this year, it will count towards next year. So it is still really important that you continue doing it. But I just wanted to kind of explain that letter that was put up on Google Classroom, just so you can kind of understand where it's all coming from. The UAL have a way of wording things that is really woolly, I would say. It doesn't always make a lot of sense. If you've got any questions or any concerns about that, please just email me, and I will try and explain it a little bit further. Okay, so on with the lesson today. So what we are going to be looking at today is storytelling. Hopefully you've all had a chance to watch the TED Talk that I have put up on the stream. It is quite long, it's 20 minutes long, but Andrew Stanton is a really cool guy. As I said on there, he's probably most known for his contributions to Pixar films, and obviously they tell stories in a really beautiful way that's really kind of heartfelt and makes you cry, makes you laugh. So his talk there is actually really quite interesting, and I hope that you've all found something from that is quite interesting for you. So we're going to talk a little bit about storytelling today, and then I've got some exercises for you to do this afternoon. Tomorrow I'm going to go into a little bit more detail around your pitch and your proposal, because you have to do that for this project. It's kind of like how we've done before, but in a little bit more detail. So the PowerPoint is here. Let me just get the PowerPoint up. So these are things we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at simple story structure, the art of conflict, and then a couple of story writing exercises. So nothing too strenuous for a Tuesday morning. A simple story structure, beginning, middle, and end. You can apply that to almost every single story that is being told to you, either in a story that you kind of tell someone about your day, or a story of like a Netflix show that you watch, a book that you read. There's a very, very clear beginning, middle, and end. So going into that a little bit further is Todorov. So hopefully you all remember Todorov. We covered him, I can't remember when it was now. I think maybe it was maybe way back in sort of October, November time. And we looked at Toy Story. So equilibrium, the story starts off where everything is normal and it is as it should be. So in Toy Story, that was Woody and all of the other toys are hanging out, having a good time. Nothing kind of untoward is happening at this point. Then you have the disruption. So something happens to disrupt that normality. So the disruption in Toy Story is that Andy's birthday party happens and he gets a brand new space toy, Buzz Lightyear. Then there is a recognition of that disruption. So your characters start to notice that something has changed and it begins to affect them. So Woody notices that Buzz is becoming the more popular toy and Andy is preferring to play with Buzz than Woody. And all the other toys like hanging out with Buzz more than Woody. So what does Woody do? He tries to knock Buzz between the desk and the wall, but instead he accidentally knocks him out the window. So it's beginning to kind of affect him to act maliciously towards another toy, which you would never normally do. And then there's a restoration. So your characters then try to fix everything and get life back to normal. So in that case, it's when Woody follows Buzz out the window and tries to get him back to Andy's room. And then there's a new equilibrium, so normality is restored, but it is just slightly different to how it was before. So in Toy Story, they get Buzz back, Andy moves house, and they all live together in the new house. But it's different to how it was before because A, it's a new house, and B, Buzz is there now, and Buzz is part of the gang. Okay, so the Todorov narrative theory is a really kind of straightforward way of plotting out a narrative by giving it these very clear kind of definitions of different points that happen in the story. Okay, so not all stories will follow this. So some films and stories choose to have a non-linear narrative. I don't know if you've come across that term before, but that means that the events that are being told do not happen in chronological order. So you don't have that beginning, middle, and end. What you will have is maybe the ending of the film being shown at the beginning, and then the film works backwards. So you might have a character shown dying at the beginning of the film, and then the rest of the film is telling you how they got to that point. Or it could be that we are shown multiple different timelines at the same time. So a couple of examples of this I don't know how many of you have seen Pulp Fiction by Quentin Tarantino, but it's a really good example of a non-linear narrative film. So there's about 7 different characters, I think, that all have their own complete stories. So they have their full beginning, middle, and end stories within their own selves. Sometimes they kind of cross over with each other, so some stories will involve other characters. So you'll get a couple of characters in one scene and a couple of characters in another scene, and then those characters will meet again somewhere else. So rather than just play all the individual stories out one by one, Tarantino decides to weave them all together. So some characters will be shown in the same place at the same time, but we'll see their stories at different points in the film. So there's a part of the film where there's 2 characters in a restaurant. Actually, it's right at the beginning. There's 2 characters in a restaurant and they decide to rob the restaurant. Later on in the film, we see that 2 other characters were in the restaurant at the same time, but that scene doesn't happen almost until the end of the film. So you can kind of see how they kind of converge and kind of weave these storylines together. If anyone is interested, I found this really helpful infographic. It's probably going to be more helpful to people that know the film really well, that kind of plays out all the different plot points at different times and puts them into the correct order. I don't know how long someone took on this, but it is really quite impressive. NoahDanielSmith.com, there he is. Well done, Noah Smith. Okay, so another example of a film that kind of plays around with that narrative structure is Dunkirk, by Christopher Nolan. So this film has 3 different timelines that are all happening at the same time. So there's 3 different stories. One story takes place with 2 pilots in the air, and this story happens over 1 hour. Another story takes place on a small fishing boat, and this story happens over 1 day. The third story takes place with soldiers on the shores of Dunkirk, and this story happens over 1 week. So while time is moving forward in each story, it's moving at a different speed. So rather than having the air story play out, the sea story play out, and the land story play out, he weaves them all together to kind of form a more succinct story. Because they kind of all converge at the same point. You can see here the ending of the film. So if we were to see the air story first, we would get the ending, and then we'd go back to the beginning and get the ending, and then we go back to the beginning and get the ending. But instead we're kind of going between them like this, and then we finally all end up at the same place. Hopefully that makes some sense as well. So structure is a really important thing to consider when you're writing your own stories, because if you don't have a structure, then chances are your stories will not kind of flow and not have that kind of really definitive beginning, middle, and end that you really need. This is very ambitious. This is very ambitious. So I wouldn't advise in a 10-minute film for you to plan to do anything like this, but it's just a way for you to consider how different stories are being told. If you haven't seen Pulp Fiction and you haven't seen Dunkirk, I would recommend that you watch both of those films immediately. They're very good and they're very entertaining. And yeah, they're just kind of slightly different. So let's move on to the art of conflict. So conflict is a really important element of any story. Your characters need to be challenged. They need to kind of have some form of conflict. Otherwise, there's not really an anchor to your story. So there's lots of different kinds of conflict that you can have. So you can have a person versus person. So characters are in direct conflict with other characters. So Rocky is a really good example because characters are physically against each other. You could have person versus self, so a character battling their own limitations. This could be like an illness or a self-doubt or something like that. So Forrest Gump is a really good example because he is a single character who is going through a hugely epic journey where he is being challenged regularly, whether it's by physical disability, whether it's by mental disability. He is kind of just always struggling with stuff that is going on within himself. Person versus society, so a character battling against society. So The Hunger Games is a really good example of that, where you have Katniss is kind of living in the districts, and you've got the capital, which is really rich, and the districts are really poor, and she's kind of battling against that the whole way through that trilogy of films. You've got person versus nature, so Jaws. You could also have nature in terms of weather, so like films about tornadoes, so Twister, or films about like The Day After Tomorrow, which is about like a tidal surge that happens in New York, and then there's an Arctic freeze, so that's quite interesting. Person versus technology, so battling with technology, for example, the Terminator, or you could, if you want to go really retro, you could think about like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where you've got people on board a spaceship where the computer that's in control of the spaceship kind of takes over and starts to kill people. And then you've got person versus supernatural, so a character battling supernatural forces or gods, like the Blair Witch Project, where you have 3 people stuck in the woods who are kind of being tormented by a witch. You could have Paranormal Activity, where you've got 2 people in a house that are being tormented by a ghost. You kind of get the picture. So you kind of really need to think about what your character is going to come up against. What is going to be the main conflict for that character? It's really important because it gives your story a focus. Without it, there isn't really much to structure your narrative around. If you just have 2 characters that are kind of walking around talking about different things, and I don't even know one of them goes home for his tea, that's not really much of a story. So you really need it to kind of structure your narrative around. Your characters need to be challenged. All great stories involve a character overcoming something. So yeah, to give your characters something to be challenged by, again, it kind of gives a focus, it gives you a structure. And overall, it makes the story more interesting, and allows you to follow a very simple narrative structure. You can use that Todorov theory. So if we go back, your disruption here, that's your conflict. So what is going to happen to make things go wrong for your characters? And then how are you going to fix it? Okay. Yeah. So you could, if you want to, you could have multiple conflicts to make things really interesting. But obviously you need to be realistic about what you can achieve. Okay? So there's a couple of story writing exercises. I would like you to choose one of the following 2 exercises to complete today. So you can either choose one that's a little bit more creative if you're kind of wanting to flex your creative muscles, or you can choose a kind of more theoretical one. So applying Todorov. So choose one of the 3 short films that I posted last week. So I know most of you actually really loved Hate, which was, I wasn't that surprised by that. I kind of thought that was the one that you would like the most, because it is about kind of real issues, kind of current issues, and it's done really beautifully. I think the poetry to it is really nice, and it kind of makes it all very realistic. And my personal favourite was 1 Minute Time Machine, because I just think that was a really creative way to tell a time travelling story. It used 1 location, it used 2 characters, and 1 prop. So it was really kind of creative in that way about what's achievable with a very minimal kind of material. You don't really need anything to do that story. So the first task is the first exercise that you can choose to do is applying Todorov's narrative theory to one of these films. So maybe pick the one that you like the most. Does it fit the conventional narrative structure as applied by Todorov? If it doesn't, then tell me how it is structured in a different way. So maybe is it the Todorov narrative structure, but it's in a different order, or is it a completely different kind of narrative structure? The second task that you can choose to do is a conflict story. So just write a 100-word story about a dangerous storm over a beach. So this is a person versus nature conflict. And I've just provided an image here for you to base your story around. So a creative task and a theoretical task. So you can choose which one of these you want to do. So a couple of tips for story writing, because all of you need to be kind of writing stories to a degree when planning out your short film. So you need to plot it out first, to decide on your narrative structure and plot out the main things that are going to happen. You could mind map certain moments, thinking about how your character may feel and images that your character might be seeing during certain moments of the story. So perhaps when that first conflict comes into play, when that disruption happens, you could maybe mind map, what will my character see, how will my character feel, and that can kind of help you develop your character a little bit more, and also develop your story a little bit more as well. Nothing ruins a good story like a bad ending. I watched a film called Vivarium the other day, and it was a really interesting film all the way up to the end, when the end was very, very bad. If anyone's seen it, you'll understand that it just didn't really end. It kind of just finished. There was no explanation as to what was happening. So you don't want to ruin your film by having a bad ending. So think of a really good ending. Don't just leave that to the last minute, like, oh, we'll figure it out in a day. So you really need to think about how that story is going to be structured and how it's going to be interesting, because that is what you are doing with your short film project. You are telling a story in a short space of time. I think one of you is doing a documentary. Documentary structure is slightly different, but you do still need to kind of be planning it out as if it is a fictional story as well. So you need to have the different points planned out. What are you going to include in your documentary? Are you going to have interviews? Are you going to have what kind of footage are you going to have happening in that documentary? So it's kind of, so hopefully that will kind of help you in your next stage of planning for your major projects. As I said before, we are continuing to do your major projects. We are not stopping major projects. It could just be that they are called something else, but you still need to do it, and that is really important, whether you are progressing on to a level 2 course with us or not. It all kind of, you need to carry on, basically, is what I'm saying. But if you have any questions about that UEL announcement, just send me an email and I'll try my best to kind of answer them. So just a reminder that your ideas generations are due today, so they need to be coming in. I haven't had very many weekly reflections, so they need to be submitted on Google Classroom as well. And the work that I've set today is for you to do today. So ideally this needs to be handed in at the end of the day or tomorrow, because I'll be setting more work for you to do tomorrow for next week. Well, it'll actually be, no, it won't be next week. Well, it'll be after Easter. So you've got 2 weeks off over Easter after this week. So you'll have a little break from me and my videos in my office for a bit. And also Easter kind of gives you an opportunity to catch up on some bits. If I know some of you are really struggling to work from home and are really struggling to access Google Classroom, so that kind of gives you time to catch up. And then when we come back after Easter, hopefully I will have answers for you about what is going to happen with your qualification and what is going to happen with the college, and we can reconvene feeling refreshed from resting, even more resting than we're doing now. Okay, all right, I shall catch you all later. Bye.